Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Steiber, and I'm a solutions architect with Cloud Harmonics. What I want to go over today is how easy it would be for you to be able to set up Okta using the Saml sign-on, the Saml single sign-on functionality to be able to authenticate using GlobalProtect into your firewall, into your network. The remote user really could be anyone, could be an administrator, coming in remotely for administration purposes, could be just an average user, right? Any of those would apply in this particular scenario. So first off, what you're looking at here is just a virtual machine instance of the firewall. And what I want to show you is we actually have the GlobalProtect already configured here. The reason for that, the purpose of this isn't to show you how to configure GlobalProtect, right? I already have GlobalProtect working, and for a user that's going to authenticate against LDAP, right? And I'll show you that that is working, and then I'll add Okta on top of that. That's the point of the video, is to show you how easy it would be to implement this Okta single sign-on solution. So first off, the first thing I want to show you is for the GlobalProtect gateway here in the firewall. Let me zoom in a little bit, actually, so you can see a little bit better. And for the GlobalProtect gateway in the firewall, what you can do is you can click on this gateway entry. And then if you go into the authentication piece, what I want to show you is, right, I have set up this authentication profile for Active Directory. So as I said, the user's authenticating against LDAP. This may be the way that they've always authenticated, whether they're on the network or off. And so we're just adding that same functionality for the remote users coming in through the VPN connection. This way, it's pretty seamless and easy for them, right? So the other thing is, this is the firewall on, just this Linux box. And if I pop over to the Windows machine here, this is just an example of, let's just say this is my remote user, and they're going to be, connecting in through GlobalProtect here. So if I enable it, it should prompt me for my credentials. I don't know if the user was already logged in. It looks like they were. If I go into the settings, you can see the user I'm using in this case is Peter Parker, right? They were already logged in. I could just as easily sign out, right, and prove that they have the ability to log in from that point. But if we pop back over to the firewall, you can see that in the instance here for the gateway, if I look at the remote users that are currently connected, there's Peter Parker coming in from that remote connection off of that Windows machine, right? And connected at this point. Right. So what we want to do now is go back into GlobalProtect, right? That's just to prove to you that this is working for Peter Parker authenticating through LDAP. In fact, just to take that a step further, you can't tell, right, that they authenticated through LDAP at this point. But if you pop into the syslog here, you can actually see in the detail here, Peter Parker did authenticate, right, using the Active Directory server, right? So it's an Active Directory, a successful Active Directory authentication. All right. So let's go back in and disconnect that user and set this up for Okta. Go ahead and log them out here. I'm also going to disable the client over on the Windows machine. That way it doesn't try to reconnect or anything while we're in the process of getting all this set up, right? So the first thing that we need to do to set this up for Okta, of course, we need to log into the Okta org. We have this demo org that we use at Cloud Harmonics, and I've simply logged into this, gone into the admin dashboard here. And in the admin dashboard is where you can see the applications that have already been added for this org. As well, you can access what they call the Okta integration network in order to add any new application connectors. So you just simply have to search for Palo Alto type application connectors. Here, you can see there's actually a couple of instances for GlobalProtect. What we want to do is utilize the one that's using Saml for authentication. Notice the difference. And so you would choose that, right? You click on add to add the application. You can name this whatever you want to. If you want to change the name, it's fine. The base URL is going to usually be the URL that points to your GlobalProtect portal address. The easiest way, I think, to be able to see something like that is if you go into the interfaces, you can see that port 1 here, this 192.168.10.200 is actually set up for our GlobalProtect portal and for the gateway, right? So that's what I would want to use in this case. But since this sits in Google Cloud platform, I actually need to reference a different address to be able to get that authentication to come through. Normally, right, I just want to point out that you would want to do this for whatever is your normal portal address, right? So plug in the address here. And the only other thing we need to do, which it tells you right below this, gives you an example there. We need to add the port number. I do realize that we are going to HTTPS, which should be using port 443, right? But in particular, because I'm doing the port forwarding from this IP address into, right, my portal address, it's necessary, right, to go ahead and add the port 443, even though you would expect that would happen with HTTPS, right? Nothing more to add here. So you just simply click on done. And then at this point, we have everything configured on this side. So we do need to make a couple of other configuration changes, but it's going to be important that we actually access this same org on the same. Okay, so you don't have to access it on the same machine where you have access to the firewall, because there's actually a couple of different ways to do that. The point to this is when I added this application connector for the sign-on functionality, I mentioned that we want to use Saml for the authentication. Notice that the way that you can set this up is you can either follow the instructions. Okta is very good about providing instructions, step-by-step, screenshots, everything to be able to set this up. You could either follow those directions, or you could copy this metadata that has all the identity provider information that Okta is going to provide when my user logs in, and supply that to the Palo Alto Network's next generation firewall, right? So you have to think about this in the way of what's the easiest way to get this file there, right? It makes sense to me to access that org here in this environment to be able to just download the metadata file and save it here, right? So it's accessible when I need to pull this into the firewall. So I'm just logging into that org, going into the admin tab or admin dashboard. Same location, right? If we go into the applications here, applications again. Since we have several different applications for this particular org, just want to point out too, it might be faster rather than just scrolling down and looking. You can always just type in part of the name. It'll filter your results. You can see this is the new application that I'm adding. Click on that, go into the same sign-on tab here. And we simply need to scroll down to the metadata here and save that on our local machine. I could give this a different name, of course, but I had saved that before, so I want to get rid of that. Go ahead and save the link as, or whatever your browser tells you to do, whatever the wording or verbiage is being used there. It's going to be called metadata by default. You can certainly change that name. What I do recommend that you do is go ahead and add the file extension of .xml. The reason for that, when we pull this into the firewall, it's going to be expecting that name, right? So it's a good idea to go ahead and add that extension to it. Or if you forgot to do it, it's fine. You can go back into downloads or wherever you save that and rename it later. Either one of those would work fine. Okay. That's the only thing that we really need to do. There is one other change that I would make to this application. At this point, I could go ahead and do it here, or I can close this out and go, take care of it in my local browser. Doesn't really matter. And let's just close it here. I'll go back into my local browser here. and show you that the one change that I would make here, it has to do with how the user is going to authenticate and how those credentials get presented from Okta, right? And so in that same sign-on tab and having to do with the SAML configuration, if I want to make changes to this, you simply click on Edit. You see where it says disable force authentication? This is a preferential thing, right? Do I want to prompt my users to re-authenticate every time? If I don't want that to happen, right, I can leave this box checked. I actually, from a security standpoint, I would rather have my users go ahead and log in every time, right? Your choice, whatever you want to do there. The other thing that I would want to change is notice how it defaults for the application, this one that I'm adding for GlobalProtect, to use the Okta username. My user in this case is actually authenticating using Active Directory, right? So you can choose a different Active Directory attribute like their SAM account name. That's what I'm going to choose and save that. Okay. That's just about all we need to do on the Okta side. The only other thing that I would say, and this is very important, is of course I need to indicate who this application is going to be assigned to so that that user has the ability to log in, right? You can assign the application to either groups or individual people. I'm going to assign this to my Peter Parker, right? Not that guy, actually, but if we go back, sorry. If we go into the assignments and assign it to Peter Parker, it shifted on me. Peter Parker, right? That's come in from widget.local, which, it's important to understand Peter Parker is, I told you that he was already authenticating through Active Directory within Okta, previously. All I've done is I've added the directory integration of this widget.local. That's where Peter Parker lives, right? In that Active Directory instance, I've now imported Peter Parker into my Okta org, and this is the tie-in of how I'm going to get Peter Parker to be able to authenticate. He's still authenticating against his, right? It's this user here. He's still going to be authenticating against LDAP, just like I showed you he was able to do for GlobalProtect earlier. The only difference is, right, now it's coming in through Okta, and you can kind of see where the tie-in happens there. That's really all I need to do from the Okta side. Everything else is going to, right, be in the firewall here. So back on the firewall, a couple of things that we need to do here to get this set up. First things first, we'll need to go into the device tab, and we're going to need to add a SAML identity provider, right? Remember, Peter's authenticating against LDAP. That's still happening, but it's happening with Okta, right, through SAML single sign-on. So we'll need to add this profile. I don't have any profiles set up, and you might think, normally to go ahead and click add to add a new profile. In this case, though, we actually want to click import. It's important because it's the only option that allows you to pull that metadata file in, right? So click on import here. You can give this any name. We'll call this pan Okta. Doesn't really matter what you call it. And then browse to our metadata file. Pull that in, right? Now, it says to validate the identity provider certificate. We have a valid certificate, so this is perfectly fine. It is the default setting. It's perfectly fine to use that. For the purposes of this demonstration, though, I'm just going to uncheck that box and go ahead and say OK. Now we have a valid SAML identity provider profile, tying Palo Alto Networks Firewall to our Okta org instance, right? The next thing I need to do then is add an authentication profile. Now, when Peter Parker logged in earlier, right, he was using this AD users profile because he is an AD user, right? I actually just need to set up a different profile for him to reference my new SAML identity provider profile. Again, you can call this profile whatever. So I'm just going to call this Okta pan, and we'll make a reference to the fact that this is a SAML authentication, even though the type is actually going to be chosen. So it'll be obvious even in the listing view. For the type, you want to choose SAML. There's many different external sources you can use, but we're using SAML in this case, not Kerberos, but SAML. And under the identity server profile, that's the profile that I just configured, right? So we just need to pull that in from the drop-down menu. Okay. If you wanted to take advantage of multi-factor authentication, the firewall does support 4 different methods to do that, right? So we could take care of that internally. Okta, since I'm using that for my identity provider, also, not only are they one of the 4 factors that we could use internally on the firewall, they also support multi-factor authentication, and we can do it externally within our Okta org. That's what I'm going to do, right? I'm going to set this up for single sign-on first and show you how that works. And then I'll show you how easy it is to add the MFA piece within Okta, okay? So we don't need to set this up. We just need to go to the advanced tab and provide the privilege to use this authentication profile. I'm going to grant that to anyone, although Peter Parker is the only one that's going to take advantage of that. Yeah. So that ties the authentication profile to the identity provider Saml profile, right? And that should be everything that we need to do at that point. The only other change that we need to make is we need to tell the GlobalProtect gateway, right? The external gateway that we're using, that we're actually changing the authentication method. It actually makes reference to that. If you click on the profile under authentication here, if you recall, this is where I showed you guys we were using Active Directory to authenticate Peter. We just need to add in, right, the reference to the new profile now. Again, you can call this anything. We'll call this Pan Okta. And this is, it could be for an admin user. It could be for, any type user, as I mentioned. I'm just going to call it admin for that purpose. Could be any operating system you can choose from the dropdown. The authentication profile is going to reference my new Octapan Saml authentication profile, right? Nothing more to do here. The only other thing that I would want to do at this point is notice how there's now a listing of 3 different authentication profiles. And, it's great because if the user is going to authenticate, it could flow through. It does use a top-down approach. It could flow through, Active Directory, external gateway, or my new profile, right, to authenticate the user in case they don't have credentials here, or that, server's not responding, or whatever the case is. It's a great flow through process. For the purposes of this, though, since we know that Peter can authenticate here, right? I actually want this one to take precedence. You can highlight that new profile, right? The authentication method rather, and just click move up until it gets into the first position. Right. So it'll be the first one that Peter's going to try whenever he logs in. That's it. And if you know anything about Palo Alto Networks firewalls, you'll know that this configuration is great, but not effective until we actually commit that. So let's do that. Now, while we're waiting for this to commit, what we're going to do next is we're going to pop back over to the Windows 10 machine, right? I'm going to re-enable the GP client. It depends on the behavior. You might get a little bit different behavior. Sometimes it may require me for the first time to go ahead and log in using the actual GP client itself. So I might plug credentials in there, and then I get redirected to the actual Okta single sign-on page. We'll kind of see how that goes. The other thing that I'm recalling is, nope, never mind. This is a brand new application, so it shouldn't be an issue there. All right, as soon as this is done, we'll pop back over and give that a test. And then, as I said earlier, the other thing that I want to do is I want to be able to, after we successfully log in using single sign-on with Saml, right? I want to be able to show you how quick and easy it is to add the MFA piece to that, right? If that's going to be something, keep in mind, Okta does have the ability to add multi-factor authentication either at the initial time that the user is logging in to your Okta org, or you can add it to individual applications, requiring them to sign in to use that application, or both, right? Either one of those could be a possibility. So it gives you some versatility within the application itself. All right, we should be all set here to go ahead and give this a test. I'm going to re-enable this. What I'm expecting as the behavior is to get a pop-up for the sign-on page for Okta, right? Looks like the user did connect. Here's what we can do, right? It connected. I guarantee you that was a successful Saml authentication, but to be able to show you fully, right? Let's go ahead and sign out of this user. It's going to require him to sign back in. And this time, we'll see if we don't get, right, the pop-up page like this, right? So notice I'm still logging into my GlobalProtect client, right? But now I'm on this Okta sign-in page, right? This is where you can see there's a definite tie-in between the two of them. So I just have to log in here. Now, just to clear up any misconception, right? The only reason I had to log in 2 times is because this is the first time that Peter's logging in and he was logged in from his previous authentication. Normally, right, under normal circumstances, the user wouldn't have already remained logged in, right? When they go to log in, it should be the case that this is the first thing that they're going to see, right? When they go to log in. Okay. That should, right, take care of the Saml assertion, and you can see the users connected. If we pop into the settings here, we can confirm, right, I'm connected. Go into the connection tab. You can see all the pertinent connection information there. As well, we can confirm in the firewall. If we go look at the system logs here, you should be able to see, right, the successful, really from this point on, right, all the way up, you can see the successful authentication. Peter Parker successfully authenticated using our authentication profile, right, and coming in through Okta, through the Okta org, right? So perfect, successful, everything's good there. The only other thing that I might add to that to show you how, how could this possibly be any better is we could add MFA to that, right? And how easy something like that could be. Adding MFA to an application is as simple as navigating to that application. Click on the application. On that same sign-on tab here, if you just scroll down, notice there's a default sign-on policy for anyone to authenticate into this application, right? That's what this is for. But to be able to add MFA, it's as simple as add a rule, give it a name, right? Anyone that's assigned to this application, or you could set up a group or assign this to users. I know Peter's already assigned to this application, so that works anywhere, any operating system, right? What do I want to do? I want to prompt him to use MFA every single time he comes in through a remote connection, right? For security purposes, I want Peter to reprove his identity, right? Save that. Simple as that to set that up. So to test it then, all we need to do is go back, right? Peter's already logged in to the GlobalProtect client. So maybe the easiest way to be able to test something like that is to refresh the connection, right? It's going to effectively cause him to re-log in again. But what I'm hoping will happen here is we get the sign-on page, but it's just MFA, right? I bypassed the whole process of signing in. And think about when Peter's logging in for subsequent times that he's connecting, he doesn't have to plug in credentials. He just simply has to, prove his identity through his phone or through his watch or whatever he's doing here, and be able to respond to that push. Just a second here. You should see the successful authentication. You can't really see the client because it's in the hidden sys tray, but you can see it's reconnected again. He's successfully connected. And that's it for this demonstration. I appreciate everyone taking the time to check this out. This is just to show you how easy it can be to be able to set up Okta for single sign-on using Saml for the authentication. In particular, this demonstration was for GlobalProtect users coming in through a VPN connection, but that could just as easily be implemented for local users logging into or through your firewall. You can set up this methodology just as well. So I hope everyone enjoyed the demonstration and you can agree how easy this can be to set up. My name is Paul Steiber, and I'm with Cloud Harmonics. Thank you for watching.